Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's explainer. We so often think of healing as this incredibly complex journey, right? Like it has to be filled with endless tests and super complicated prescriptions. But what happens when the answer is just astonishingly simple? Today, we're unpacking a deeply personal, firsthand account of overcoming a stubborn, painful ulcer through literally one unexpected dietary change. It's a whole story about awareness, discipline, and really just listening to your body. I want you to genuinely think about this for a second. What if one everyday food, something you wouldn't even think twice about eating or, tossing into a salad, was the secret source of your chronic pain? I mean, it sounds almost too simple to be true, doesn't it? But as we're going to see in this explainer, our daily habits, and especially our daily diet, can totally harbor these hidden triggers that just keep us locked in a really frustrating cycle of discomfort. Now, to truly appreciate the relief here, we first have to understand the reality of the pain. The source material lays out a pretty brutal baseline, a grueling struggle with an ulcer that dragged on for years. And we aren't just talking about a mild stomachache here. This was a chronic condition, characterized by just intense agony that always seemed to strike at the absolute worst possible times. Just imagine trying to get a good night's rest, only to be jolted awake night after night by this searing pain in your stomach. It's exhausting, it's super isolating, and it completely drains your energy for the next day. The author of our source actually puts the reality of this whole vicious cycle incredibly bluntly. They mentioned being, quote, often in pain, especially in the middle of the night, and constantly taking medication for relief. And just think about that loop. You wake up in agony, you reach for the medicine cabinet, you get a fleeting moment of temporary relief, maybe just barely enough to fall back asleep. But you aren't actually fixing the root cause, are you? You're really just masking a symptom that is basically guaranteed to return the very next night. And this went on for years. Let's move to and see how this builds. We can actually map out the entire trajectory of this journey. It's kind of like a micro-hero's journey, really. Steps 1 and 2 are that dark place we were just talking about. Years of midnight pain and relying heavily on medication. But then, right there at step 3, comes the turning point, which was sparked by a completely simple piece of outside advice. That advice then leads directly to step 4, the actual action of eliminating the trigger. And finally, that brings us to step 5, the gradual but ultimate disappearance of the ulcer entirely. So what exactly was the catalyst for that turning point? I mean, after all those years of suffering, after all those middle-of-the-night wake-up calls and endless bottles of medication, someone just offered a piece of advice. And that advice literally came down to eliminating just one single thing. We're not talking about a massive, sweeping lifestyle overhaul here. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't a complex multi-phase elimination diet at all. It was just the number one. One everyday item that simply needed to go. Now, what's really fascinating about this is the reveal of the culprit itself. Ready for the twist? The culprit was tomatoes. Yeah, tomatoes. Someone simply suggested they avoid them. The action plan was incredibly straightforward. Just completely remove raw tomatoes, cooked tomatoes, hidden tomato sauces, the whole shebang from their daily diet. It's so interesting because, well, tomatoes are pretty universally viewed as a healthy staple food. Yet for this specific individual and their specific ulcer, they were the exact trigger keeping all that pain alive. When you really weigh the options here, the contrast is staggering. On the one hand, you have the mild inconvenience of avoiding a beloved everyday food. Checking labels, asking the waiter questions, skipping the pizza sauce. But on the other side, you have the massive, life-altering reward of living an entirely pain-free life. When the author weighed those two things against each other, the choice obviously became remarkably clear. So, the crucial point is how we actually define discipline in this context. The author notes that yes, one needs to be disciplined, but they immediately follow that up by saying that for them, it's actually incredibly easy to stay away from tomatoes. Why? Because they simply want to be pain-free. This wasn't some kind of discipline born out of punishment or super strict dieting rules. Not at all. It was an empowering, active, daily choice to prioritize their own long-term well-being and physical relief way over the temporary gratification of eating a specific food. Honestly, the utter absence of agony makes that kind of discipline pretty effortless. And this perfectly illustrates the cause and effect of that discipline over time. Like we said, for years, the baseline was chronic pain and reliance on medication. Then comes day 1 of the new habit, just entirely eliminating tomatoes. The source material tells us that after they stopped eating them, the ulcer gradually disappeared. It wasn't like overnight magic, but rather a steady, real healing process. And the absolutely most beautiful part of this whole journey, The author literally states, "I can tell you now, I don't feel the pain again and haven't for years." Years of suffering completely replaced by years of being totally pain-free, all from just one dietary tweak. No way, right? But it's true. Now, before we wrap up, the author is very explicit about a really vital reality check. They state perfectly clearly, this is basically based on my experience, not a medical recommendation. Because, well, everyone's biology is totally unique. While tomatoes were absolutely the hidden trigger for this specific individual's ulcer, they might not be for someone else. This story is an incredibly powerful testament to listening to your body and exploring dietary triggers, for sure, but it is absolutely not a substitute for professional medical advice. Which brings us to a final, provocative thought I want to leave you with today. If a simple, everyday vegetable was responsible for literally years of midnight agony for this author, what hidden triggers might be hiding in your daily routine? Whether it's physical pain, an afternoon energy slump, or just a restless night's sleep, sometimes the solution isn't about adding a new medication or some overly complex routine. Sometimes the most profound healing simply comes from identifying and removing just one simple thing. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope it inspires you to look just a little closer at your own daily habits.